It's very nice of you to come in your hundreds. Thank you very much. Welcome to whatever this gallery is called.
The gallery.
What?
The gallery.
The gallery. Thank you. And I want to actually, I'm going to build this little talk, which is only going to last about 10 minutes. Actually, I've had 9, so I've only got a minute. No, never mind. Around the feast over there, the buffet, because it really is good stuff. And the first thing is the pork pie. All this stuff was cooked within a few miles of our house in Oxford. It's all local stuff. And most of the people are, I think we could say, good friends of ours. Wouldn't you say that? I think we could. The pork is in the pork pie, the raised pork pie, comes from a breed known as the Sandian Black. I only myself discovered the Sandian Black a few years ago. I thought it was more or less extinct, but apparently not. It hung on in a zoo, actually, a wildlife park. And now there's quite a few herds of Sandian Black. And I'm not sure how it differs from the Gloucester Old Spot, but they're all that kind of thing, you know, they're all that. And what they do, these pigs, they were known as orchard pigs. And being orchard pigs, they eat apples and all that kind of stuff. And this is what pigs ought to do. They ought to just forage for whatever is left over. And that's always been their role in life. And in the olden days, people didn't even keep pigs for meat. They kept them just to keep the place tidy, just to clear up the rubbish. But they were still worth it. And now, as Tracy is going to be talking about in a few minutes' time, the whole thing is reversed. Everything is done for money. They're not even fed on good old-fashioned stuff anymore. They're not even fed on good old-fashioned feed. They're just raced through much meat as you can produce in the shortest time for the maximum profit, and so on. But this is proper traditional pig keeping with a traditional breed. Brilliant stuff. And it's cooked by the chap who calls himself the late cook, not because he's dead, but because he came to cooking very late in life and turned into a brilliant chef. And I've got a little leaflet about him. The pickle is by a very nice woman who used to be a ballet dancer and I believe still coaches. I think she's 90-something, isn't she? Getting on, she's old. But she makes pickles, and all the pickles are grown in her garden. The cheese? The cheese is brilliant, produced by a chap called Roger Tudge. And he gets, the cattle are Jerseys, local farm producing Jerseys. The goat's cheese are these Sanan breed, which again are local farm. And then the Friesland sheep, which are well-known traditional milky sheep for used milk. Brilliant cheeses which he makes. He makes about half a dozen different kinds. Artisanal cheese, that's the way cheese should be made. In my opinion, however, despite all this brilliance, the pièce de résistance is the bread, which is cooked by friends of ours called Penny and Dragan, who have the world's smallest commercial kitchen. It's about 2.5 square meters, and they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and stand in this incredibly small space. And they also have, because he's Croatian, Dragan, they have a Croatian oven in the garden, brick oven, about which they've got some absolute foul neighbor who complains about the fact that there's smoke coming out of the top, wood smoke. But that's how they cook the bread, and it's brilliant, and they call it love loaves. And Dragan, when he's not being a baker, he's actually a magician, and he does he pulls flags of all nations out of his ears and that kind of stuff. Anyway, but the point about the bread, apart from the fact that it is small-scale artisanal stuff and they cook it every morning, is the flour that they're now using, which is grown by another friend of ours called John Letts, who is a seriously brilliant guy. He used to be a plant geneticist, and then he became a farmer and a baker. And he rediscovered, and he's also a thatcher, and he rediscovered traditional wheats. And he found them, he first became very intrigued with them because he found them on roofs when he was thatching. And when you re-thatch a roof, you don't take away all that was there before, you just take away the top few layers, and all the older stuff's there. And in some medieval barn, 14th century barn, he found existing varieties of wheat of the kind, with the seeds. Now the seeds were no longer fertile, but it stimulated him to think, these things must still exist. And he then sort of scoured all of Europe finding sort of peasant farms and seed banks where they had these ancient varieties. And these are the ones that grow about 6 feet high. These are the ones that are used for thatching, very stiff straw. And these are the ones that are shown in fields, paintings by Bruegel, for example, where the peasants, they're only 4 feet high anyway, but they disappear in the wheat. And you may have wondered, how is it that in a Bruegel painting the peasants disappear, whereas in a modern wheat field the wheat's about that high? It's all down to the breeding, apart from the increase in size of peasants. Not that there are anymore. But John has sort of scoured Europe, finding these ancient varieties of wheat. It's illegal to sell them. It's even illegal to give them away. It's not illegal to grow them and put them into flour. And he loves provoking the authorities, the powers that be. Like, he has handed me wheat on a stage before now in the hope that somebody will arrest him and send him to jail so it become a cause célèbre. Never actually has, and I paid him 2 shillings, I might say. I never got it back. I paid him 2 shillings to make it doubly illegal. But the point is, he bakes this stuff and that it makes tremendous bread. Now, what I wanted to say is, if you were an audience off the street, which you're not, but if you were, you would at this point be saying, well, this is all very well and it's all very quaint, but really it's just sort of nice people from Oxfordshire or smug people from Oxfordshire, basically playing a game. This has nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with feeding the world. And if Sir John Beddington was sitting here, who is the chief government scientist, or Charles Godfrey, who's the ecologist who advises him, and so on, so on, so on, they would be saying, well, this is complete nonsense. You've got to do, there's 7 billion people in the world. You've got to do things on the industrial scale. You've got to have vast fields. You've got to have Monsanto. You've got to be throwing on hundreds and thousands of tons of organic fertilizer. Oh, this is organic, of course. No organic, none of that fertilizer. This is the only way forward. And this is just a little game played by middle-class, nostalgic people. And this, like so much of what the wisdom that comes from on high and controls our lives, is the complete opposite of the truth, the complete opposite of the truth. And if we are serious about feeding the world, 7 billion people, if we actually care about that, then we would design farms that were expressly designed for that purpose. And farms that are expressly designed for the purpose of providing good food are, in fact, as organic as possible, because they've got to be low input. They are as diverse as possible. In other words, they're much closer to John Lett's conception of what wheat should be like, because that gives you resistance to disease. And that is what gives you resilience. It enables you to change direction whenever you need to do so. And if you're serious about sustaining the thing, you have to have the whole thing very tightly integrated. You can't just grow pigs over here and wheat over there and cattle over there in great factories. And if you do that, it's very, very complicated. And if it's very, very complicated, you have to have lots of very skilled farmers. And if you have lots of very skilled farmers operating complicated systems, then there's no advantage in scale up. So you actually need small to medium-sized farms. And in fact, more than 50% of the food in the world is produced still from small to medium-sized, more or less organic farms, even though they are the ones that the powers that be completely ignore. And another 20% comes from hunting and fishing and people's back gardens. So all this industrial stuff that we're told is the only way forward and the only reality and all that stuff gets all the research money and all the money that's thrown at it and all the support from the government, actually produces only about 30% of the world's food. So this stuff over here is not little whimsical stuff from nice middle-class people. This actually represents the future of the world. You might say, what's all this got to do with the Olympics, because this is the Olympic year and all that kind of stuff? And I think it's the same syndrome. What you see in modern farming is what you might call the powers that be, big governments, corporates, banks, all their attendant experts and intellectuals, effectively taking over something which actually humanity itself had developed very brilliantly to a very, very high standard, and using it purely for the purposes of profit and purely for the purposes of basically of keeping themselves in power. They don't possibly realize that this is what they're doing because they're not very well educated, these people. So they don't have any sense of history or any sense of what other people do. But that is the effect. And it's the same with these modern 2012 Olympics, that they're supposed to be the People's Olympics. They're supposed to be benefiting people as a whole, the community of East London. And of course, they're cashing in on the brilliance of the athletes as opposed to the brilliance of the farmers. But actually, it's going to be a carve-up, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, etc., Nike, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's another great power trip imposed from on top. And one might ask, what's all this got to do with art? Why are we in an art gallery? I can't answer that. Stephen's going to be answering that later. But my general feeling is that the point about art, really, the ultimate part, is that it looks at the world from its own point of view, and it doesn't accept what the powers that be tell us at all, and it doesn't accept that you have to think along straight lines. It's to do with a kind of overall grasp of what the world is like and an expression of what the world is like, and that's what we need. We need to rethink actually just about everything if we're going to feed ourselves well, etc., and reclaim our inheritance. And that roughly in 10 minutes is how it all fits together. I'm not the only person speaking, you'll be very glad to hear. I'm going to hand over to Tracy Worcester, who had for many years, or several years anyway, been directing an organisation called Pig Business, which, as you might expect, directly addresses the issue of industrial pig breeding and keeping why it's such a disaster. Thank you. Here's Tracy.